Next week, the United Nations will host an international conference aimed at recognizing a Palestinian state. However, it appears some of its key backers are, well, backing out. France and Saudi Arabia are set to co-host the conference, which kicks off on the 17th of June in New York. And for the last few weeks, French President Emmanuel Macron was lobbying European leaders to join the call for recognition of Palestine. Others, like the UK Labour government, had initially signaled they were also considering supporting the move, which would have granted the motion significant momentum. That is, until earlier this week, when France and the UK reversed course, saying they no longer intended to go as far as immediate recognition and will instead set out conditions that must be met before a Palestinian state would be recognized in the future. So what happened? For one thing, the US and Israel have been aggressively lobbying allied governments behind the scenes to abandon the conference altogether. On Tuesday, a diplomatic cable sent from Washington warned countries against taking anti-Israel actions and said attending the conference would be viewed as acting against US foreign policy interests. That was followed by bombshell remarks from the US ambassador to Israel, Mike Huckabee, who suggested that the US may no longer pursue the goal of a two-state solution.
What does that Palestinian state look like?
Okay.
Where is it? Where is it going to be?
Well, what
does
are the
it have to be in Judea and Samaria? Does it need to be somewhere different? Does it need to be an opportunity for people to have a true place that is completely their own? Or is it going to be in the existing areas that are currently under the dominion of the PA? So there's a lot of questions. That's why I'm saying I don't believe anybody can say it's impossible, it'll never happen. But if someone wants to declare that this is the exact strip of geography that is going to be the future Palestinian state, that's where the complication comes from.
Well, maybe the word is exact. That's the problem. Are you suggesting that somewhere other than mandatory Palestine area, that it could be in Saudi Arabia or something? Or are you suggesting?
I'm just saying that I think every option should be and could be on the table.
So why have Western states been so tongue-tied over action on Gaza? And what does it mean for the prospect of bringing the genocide to an end? Well, joining us now is the UK Director of Human Rights Watch, Yasmin Ahmed. Yasmin, thank you so much for being here today.
Thank you for having me.
I want to start by getting your reaction to the US Ambassador to Israel, Mike Huckabee, who seemed to be undermining the long-held position of the United States on the two-state solution. Now, the State Department has since said that Huckabee was only speaking for himself, but it does pose the question of whether the international consensus around the occupation is now being brought into question.
Yes, well, I think what's interesting about what you have discussed on the segment so far and this conference and what Huckabee has said is that actually the conference is actually a follow-on from the International Court of Justice's advisory opinion, which was issued over a year ago. The International Court of Justice being the apex UN court of the world. And that advisory opinion made very and absolutely clear that Israel's occupation is unlawful and the acts that it's carrying out within that occupation are unlawful as well. And so what we are saying as Human Rights Watch is, while obviously the issue of recognition is on the table, the court, the apex UN court, has made very clear that Israel must leave the occupied territories. And it has said that on the basis that it is unlawfully carrying out acts such as annexation, violating the right of self-determination, and also carrying out apartheid on the occupied territories. So for Human Rights Watch, what we are saying is this conference and this moment is critical to ensure that states are taking steps to give life to that advisory opinion. And the advisory opinion set out very clearly the obligations on states and what they should do. And one very clear step that they should be doing in light of this conference is taking the very simple step of banning settlement goods, which many states have failed to do so far.
Now, next week, that UN conference hosted by France and Saudi Arabia seemed like it was a last-ditch attempt at salvaging what was left of the two-state solution. Why are France and the UK now appearing to be backing out of taking action?
Well, look, it's interesting because what we have seen is quite a significant amount, albeit way too late, of multilateral action that has been taken in respect of Gaza and the West Bank recently. Obviously, the EU announced a review of the Israel-EU Association Agreement. The UK have suspended future trade talks and are reviewing the 2030 Israel-UK roadmap. And as your listeners will be aware, the UK and a number of other states have also sanctioned Ben-Gvir and Smotrich in relation to their statements and incitement of forced displacement of the Palestinian people, both in West Bank and also referred to in Gaza as well. But I think what we're saying with respect to this conference is that the conference must have tangible outcomes. If it fails to have any tangible outcomes in light of the situation that we're seeing on the ground in Gaza and the West Bank, it will be a failure of the international community as a whole. And there are clear steps that the international community and concrete steps that they must be taking now.
I want to talk to you a little bit more about the sanctions and the concrete steps, but let's stay with the conference for a little bit. Now, there's many prominent Palestinian voices that have been dismissive of the process of a two-state solution. They say that it's an impossible goal given the realities on the ground in the West Bank and now in Gaza. And as we speak, Israel is constructing 22 new illegal settlements. What would recognizing a Palestinian state, even on paper at this conference next week, what would it actually mean in real terms?
Well, Human Rights Watch doesn't speak to the question of a two-state solution. It falls somewhat out of our mandate. But I think, as I noted, what is very, very clear from a legal perspective, which is what we as Human Rights Watch do, we look at the law and push states to implement the law. And the law is very clear. The occupation is unlawful. Israel must leave the occupied territories. What it is doing in the occupied territories are the most serious international crimes that give rise to obligations of every state to stop them from happening. And what we have seen is some movement from states to stop them, but certainly not enough.
And you mentioned those sanctions that we saw at the start of the week against far-right Israeli ministers Bezalel Smotrich and Itamar Ben-Gvir that were brought by the UK, Canada, New Zealand, Australia, and Norway. Do you think these sanctions have gone far enough to address the issue at hand?
No, the simple answer is absolutely not. And in fact, it goes back to the question you asked me about the two-state solution. If in fact what states are saying that they want to achieve, whether now or in the medium to long term, is in fact a two-state solution, then they should be taking concrete measures to address that. Now, obviously, it's welcome that they have sanctioned two Israeli ministers for their incitement to violence and inhumane acts in the West Bank, and they referenced Gaza as well. That is important. But they could be taking steps, and they need to be taking steps right now to dismantle the settlement enterprise. And that includes just merely stopping the trade in settlement goods and ensuring that no UK companies or companies in France, in Canada, in Germany or elsewhere are doing business in those settlements. There are very concrete measures that states could and should be taking now.
A lot of your work, Yasmin, involves lobbying the UK government to take action to end the genocide in Gaza. What has that process been like over the last few months? Have you been facing pushback from British lawmakers?
It's a very good question. Look, I think everybody who's listening to this and watching this will know, as it has been for us at Human Rights Watch and me as the UK director, it has been a horrific time to watch the ongoing genocidal acts, the crimes against humanity, the war crimes, day in, day out, being carried out against the people, Palestinians in Gaza. It's been horrific. We have been continuously engaging with UK government ministers and with officials. I would say that it has been frustrating at times, well, very, very frustrating at times. We have been pushing the UK government to take concrete steps, which they have done, but they have not gone far enough. Yes, they imposed an arms embargo, but it was a partial embargo. And what they did is they left a critical loophole that allows F-35 fighter jet components that are used by the IDF in Gaza, for Israel to be able to get those supply of those components through a global supply pool. They've also not imposed a comprehensive arms embargo, which is absolutely necessary. There is no question right now that there is a serious risk of genocide. And that serious risk of genocide triggers an obligation on every single state in this world to ensure that they take concrete action to stop that genocide from continuing and that genocide from being carried out. And states, including the UK government, have acted too slow and have not taken and used all the leverage that they need to be using in this context.
Let's talk about the arms embargo and this issue of arms trade. You published a piece earlier this week saying that it was the elephant in the room of having any kind of conversation about what's happening in Gaza. The US, of course, is the primary supplier of weapons to Israel, but Germany, France, the UK, and Canada all supply weapons, or at least weapons parts, to Israel, and that has not stopped. What would it take, in your eyes, for real change to occur on this front?
Well, it's a very good question, because if it hasn't changed in light of what we're seeing on the ground and the multiplicity of evidence from human rights organizations like Human Rights Watch, Amnesty International, from the UN, from if that is not enough, I don't know what is enough to stop these governments from continuing to supply arms. As you will be aware, Human Rights Watch and Amnesty International are intervening in a case that is brought by Al-Haq and Global Legal Action Network, which is trying to stop the UK government from supplying the F-35 fighter jet components to this global supply pool that are then sourced by Israel, that are then used in Gaza. But the UK government is continuing, and they're being dragged kicking and screaming through the UK courts, arguing the most untenable legal arguments around why, in fact, it's lawful for them to continue to do this in the face of what is a clear and serious risk of genocide. So I hope that the legal case will be sufficient. I also hope that governments on their own back will see what is happening and ensure that they're taking the steps that are necessary. I mean, if we're talking about a responsibility to protect people from the most serious atrocities that can be committed in this world, that is what we're seeing now. And for states to not be using every piece of leverage and ensuring that they're not complicit is just unacceptable.
Yasmin Ahmed, the UK Director of Human Rights Watch, we really appreciate your time. Thank you so much for joining us.